Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Sorry about the little delay on that. I was having trouble getting us live on YouTube also. So thanks everybody for joining us for the sunflower production update. And this is a joint effort of the High Plains Sunflower Committee, Colorado State University, and Kansas State University. My name is Jeanne Falk Jones, so I'm one of the agronomists with K-State Research and Extension in far northwest Kansas. And we have a couple other folks joining us. We have Ron Meyer. Ron is one of the agronomists with Colorado State University in East Central Colorado. And then we have a few other folks from the High Plains Sunflower Committee also on here. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into getting the lay of the land and seeing what else going on. So let me get my screen shared and we will be ready to go. Some of the background things can be a little bit crazy here. So of course, when I want to share my screen, I can't see where to share it here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining us. So as I said, this is the joint effort of the High Plains Sunflower Committee, Kansas State University, and Colorado State University. So I've had some questions on who is the High Plains Sunflower Committee. So this is actually a subset of the National Sunflower Association. It's made up of, the High Plains Committee is made up of agronomists, of seed companies, of growers, of our end processors. And so a big group of folks who are part of this. And so really the purpose of it is for regional efforts for research and extension and promotion of sunflower production and sunflower markets. So this group all meets together, and Ron Meyer with Colorado State and myself are also part of this committee. And that's how this sunflower production webinar kind of came to be, as we were sitting down talking, not sitting down together, but sitting down on our Zoom and talking about what can we do to help growers in sunflower production. And so that's how this webinar kind of came about. Okay, so for folks who are online, it's really important for you guys to have the ability to communicate back and forth with us and answer your questions. And if you're having trouble hearing or things along those lines, just let us know. So if you have subject matter questions, so if you have a specific question about, say, sunflower fertility, you can put that in the Q&A box down here at the bottom. So this Q&A box, we actually will have all of the subject matter stuff. If you have technical questions, you can't hear, you can't see slides, things along those lines, we have a chat box over here for that. So the Q&A, by putting them in the Q&A box, it's easier for us to keep track of questions and make sure that everything gets answered. So that's why we ask you to put those in the Q&A box. If you are watching live on YouTube, so there's going to be about a 7-second delay between Zoom and YouTube. So in some cases, we may have a little bit of we may pause for a second to let everybody get answers in on things. But if you are on YouTube, you can also put comments in. And so if you have a YouTube account, go ahead and log into that. If not, create your YouTube account. And then over in the area where it asks for comments, go ahead and just put those in the comments box, and we'll keep an eye on those also. If all of that fails or you don't feel comfortable doing any of that, just drop me an email, and my email address is jfalkjones@ksu.edu. Email me your questions and we'll make sure we get them asked. Okay, oh, Craig Dinkle. So I recruited some help to monitor the Q&A box. Craig Dinkle is our extension agent in the Midway District, which is Russell and Ellsworth counties. And so he is going to help us manage the Q&A and the chat box and things like that. So it's not just Ron or I keeping an eye on that. So if you have any questions, Craig will be the one who may be helping get those answered for you. Okay, if you are needing CCA credits, which I know several of you that registered are looking for those, go ahead and send me an email, and that's jfalkjones@ksu.edu. please put your name and your CCA number. Do this at the beginning and at the end of the webinar, so I know you've been here the whole time, but go ahead and just drop me an email and just to let me know that you're here, and then I'll get you on the list. And as soon as the webinar is over, and I will get them turned into CCA so that you will get your credits for attending this webinar. Okay, so with that, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or put them in the chat box, depending on what we have going here. But we're going to go ahead and just jump right into sunflower production. So Ron Meyer is our agronomist with Colorado State University. He's based over in Burlington, but covers a pretty wide area. And Ron's been growing and helping teach about sunflowers for many, many years. And so he's a really good one to cover sunflower production. So with that, Ron, we're going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Jeannie. Give me a thumbs up. I have a visual on you. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Great. And then I'm going to share.
Slides yet, though.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, Jeannie, I lost the visual, but can you still hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen and I can hear you.
Awesome, we're broadcasting. Good news. So I'll talk a little bit about sunflower updates and mostly on production. We'll cover a little bit on agronomics and genetics and things like that. And if you have questions, type them in. Jeannie and Craig, if you guys need to break in to ask a question, just do that. But I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So Jeannie showed a picture of the High Plains Sunflower Production Handbook. So this is really an important piece of information. If you don't have one of these, get them. And how do you get them? You can stop at any extension office. You can email Jeannie or myself and request one. They'll come without direct cost to you, and really an important information piece. There is also another one in the Northern Plains out of North Dakota State University. So you can download that as well. And and a lot of what we're going to be talking about with a few updates, but a lot of it will be in this High Plains Sunflower Production Handbook. So if you don't have one and you have an interest, make sure you get one. And they're not difficult to get. Just get a hold of one of us and we can sure get one for you. So, you know, we could start or end with economics. I'm going to start with economics. And on the right top hand side, I've got two websites listed. So one is a Colorado State University ABM, Ag and Business Management site. The other one is the Kansas State University site. Both of these sites have production costs and returns on them. And so these are just essentially spreadsheets. And so the beauty of this is you can plug your own numbers in on your own farm and get some economic data that might help guide you to some production decisions. But you'll notice in the middle, there are costs per units already entered, and those are some average costs that the economists have plugged in. If you don't like those numbers, you can plug your own in, and really a good piece of information for your farm. And so these are available for most crops. Sunflower is one of those. And so if you get up on those websites, you can download these and do some information gathering on your own as well. The other piece is agronomics. And so where do you get information? So private companies generate information. They have test plots out there, but CSU and Kansas State University and all of the other land-grant universities also publish yield data. And so I've got up there a couple of resources. If you Google CSU crops testing, you'll come into the crops testing website at Colorado State University. And then the other website up there is K-State's. And so those will get you into the crop production trial websites. And for the most part, Jeannie and I and our colleagues are conducting trials at various locations on farms across both states. And so feel free to get up into those websites if you need some local agronomic data. And so that's important because you want to choose the right varieties. And you're going to see this data piece a little bit long in just a little bit, where I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. But this was generated by Cameron Pierce and Carl Esping. It comes from Central Kansas. So I'll start talking a little bit about the breeding technology in sunflowers. And so sunflowers is one of those crops that is not a quote GMO unquote crop. So all of the hybrids that we have are done through traditional and newer plant breeding technologies. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those newer ones. So there are diagnostic markers, there are flanking markers, there are polymorphic markers. These are all for candidate genes that the plant breeders want to take from one plant and put it into the new plant. And I've got up on the center there something called SNP technology. So SNP is just an acronym for single nucleotide polymorphism. And it's a genetic marker technique that's used in sunflowers. And essentially what it is when they find a variation at a single position in a DNA sequence, these are breeder-friendly markers that they can clip out of the gene sequence and transfer them into the new plant. So essentially that AGGT sequence that we're seeing is a flag, and it marks a set of genes that breeder might want to transfer. Now, these genes could be yield-enhancing genes. They could be quality-enhancing genes, such as larger seed size or more oil. They could be insect or disease-resistant genes that they're transferring. And so those plant breeders use a number of scientific techniques to get the job done. And one of the other issues out there, or reasons we have all this big gene pool available, is there are 20 species of wild sunflowers in the world, essentially. And that's how we got Clearfield technology. So we can take Clearfield sunflowers, spray them with Beyond herbicide, and they're resistant to that herbicide. So that's not a GMO technology. That's one of these SNP technologies that scientists have found in a wild sunflower plant, brought it into the domesticated sunflower plant, and we have a new variety now that is Clearfield technology tolerant. So that's not new technology by any means, but I just wanted to explain a little bit about what some of the tools that the breeders are using are you currently employing. So some of the others on the bottom left-hand side that you might hear about are CRISPR technology, single seed descent method, double haploid, composite interval mapping. These are all tools that plant breeders use to develop new varieties. None of these tools are quote GMO unquote tools. So to get into the GMO designation, you have to take a gene that is foreign to sunflower, bring it into the sunflower plant, and make it work. So that technology does exist. I've actually researched some of that and tested some of that new technology. It's not available, and I don't think it will be available because of our wild sunflower population. So there is some concern that if we bring a foreign gene into domesticated sunflowers, that gene will transfer itself into the wild population. And that's not something that EPA and some of the other agencies want to see. So not so sure we'll ever see GMO technology come into sunflower, but you never know. In addition to that, there are current red seed weevil resistant markers that are being developed. They found one marker now. And in addition to that, we also have disease resistant sunflowers as well that have been found in the wild types, brought into the domesticated types. And so I think in the future, we may have insect resistance carried through the gene pool with some of our domesticated varieties. We'll have to see. It's not an exact science by any means. And sometimes when you take a gene from one plant, bring it into the new plant, you get other factors that are affected. One of those factors is yield drag. And so that's something that everybody needs to be concerned about. And so again, not an exact science, but they're making leaps and bounds in this information. Well, we'll talk just a little bit about market types. And so there's really three big markets out there. There's the oil market, the confection market, and the birdseed market. The oil market, 40% oil is the standard. So when you're selling oil sunflower seeds, you're essentially selling oil to the processors because they're crushing that oil out and they're selling the oil. And so 40% oil is a standard. If you bring seeds in above 40% oil, there's a premium paid. If you bring seeds in below 40% oil, there are discounts that will apply. So oil is pretty important. Yield is the most important. Oil is second most important. And then in the confection market, we're talking about snack foods, in-shell markets, salad bar markets. Seed size is important in the confection market. And so when you bring a load in, they're going to run it over a 2264 screen. And any seed that runs over that, so the large size seed, they'll pay you a premium on. And seed that drops below that, so below a 2264 size, they won't pay the premium on. So just keep in mind that not only do you need to deliver yield to the market, but in this particular market, the confection market, you have to deliver quality as well. So that means big seed size, low insect numbers. Those things are very important. And we'll talk about insects and insecticides in just a little bit. But for the confection market, I've got in red, a contract is needed. So you can't just plant confection varieties and then expect to haul them into a confection processor. Unless you have a contract, you'll be on the open market and they may not even have room for them. So just keep in mind, if you're growing for the confection market, you've got to have them contracted before you plant. And then another market is the birdseed market. And so that can be a very important market for sunflower producers for some years. Birdseed buyers tell me that the big demand begins in the wintertime when there are winter storms moving across central and eastern United States. And when that happens, people in town feel sorry for the birds and they start feeding them. And so that increases the demand for sunflowers because sunflowers is one of the main ingredients in birdseed. And so that's important. So just a little marketing tip. If you're producing oil type sunflowers and you've got crummy oil, so below 40%, you could look into a birdseed market and see what they're paying versus the oil market. The birdseed guys don't really care about seed size much, nor do they care about oil percentage. And so there is another market out there for your oil type. And then the last one I've got it mentioned there, con oil. So that can meet both markets. It's a contract market and a pretty small market. But again, it's one of those markets that exists there. So, just to give you a little history, the earlier type of sunflower we used to raise were linoleic, and the linoleic just explains the fat content of the sunflower. We moved into the new sun, which are middleaics, and so they're a little better quality, a little longer shelf life for the oil, a little healthier. And from there, we're moving into the hyoleic market. So that is currently the healthiest oil available in the sunflower lineup. And then that oil also has a better shelf life and has better frying performance. And when you start talking about shelf life and frying performance, the people in the food preparation industry get real excited because if it has better frying performance and a better shelf life, they can keep it in their cookers longer, and that has economic advantages to them. So hyoleic is the one that the sunflower, the oil type sunflower we're currently growing in. It's the one that market wants. Now, I've got some other information about another oil type, and we may or may not be producing it in the future. So it's called Nutrisun. And if you take a look at the chart on the bottom right-hand side, the blue and the yellow colored lines or areas are the better quality. And so this Nutrisun is a high steric, hyoleic oil. And I've been talking about this one for a couple of years now, and I finally called a plant breeder a while back and asked, why are we not seeing Nutrisun being introduced? And one of the issues they have, remember we talked plant breeding is not exact science, there seems to be a yield drag when they bring that high steric, hyoleic gene into our domesticated sunflowers. And so until they get that cleaned up, we may not see Nutrisun on the market. But if it does hit the market, keep an eye on it because it will be highly desirable by the commercial processors for a frying oil and a cooking oil. So just a little bit more about our markets. This is the confection side, and you can see the confection sunflowers along the bottom. Those are commercially available almost any place, and you can get them in different flavors: cracked pepper, dill pickle, smoky barbecue. There's even a Jack Daniel's flavored one, and they've assured me that they have evaporated all the alcohol out. It just tastes a little bit like Jack Daniel's whiskey. So those are all available. in addition to that, here in the United States, we tend to eat the smaller type sunflowers. There's a big demand for our high plains grown confection sunflowers from some countries, such as Spain. Spaniards, when they eat a sunflower seed, they will take one at a time, put it up to their mouth, shell it, and without ever letting it go, take the meat out and then drop it down. And so they like the seeds we raise here. Our seeds here in the high plains actually are grown to a larger seed size than the same varieties in the northern plains. So we have a very good export market for our confection seeds. Also on the top right-hand corner is sun butter, and that is a paste that is made out of sunflowers. And why would sunflower be a market choice? The reason is there are peanut allergies out there to peanut butter, so this is a replacement for that. And if you want to learn more about sun butter and order some, I've got the website address over there at sunbutter.com. In fact, just this week, they have a new chocolate sun butter, and I ordered some. So I've got some coming to Burlington, Colorado here in the near future. And of course, there's the kernel type sunflowers as well that are shown in this. So those are just some of the markets that are available for the confection. On the oil side, on the left-hand side, we see sun milk. And there's a group out of Boulder, Colorado that is producing milk out of sunflower seeds. And I've got their web address over there, drinksunmilk.com. If you have an interest in that, get over to their website, take a look. We've had it at some of our farm shows and whatnot. And so very healthy drink. They make them with organic sunflower seeds, high in protein, dense in nutrition. And again, if you have an interest in sun milk, it's available out there. And on the right-hand side is sunflower oil, and that can be purchased from Colorado Mills in Lamar, Colorado. I've got their web address over there. If you have an interest in sunflower oil, that address will get you to their site as well. Again, sunflower oil is a very healthy oil, a little bit healthier even than olive oil. And so it's really a market driver right now. Food processors are looking for low-fat, healthier oils. Well, what about marketing? So this just shows the corn market in a Chicago Board of Trade. And the disadvantage sunflower marketers have is they don't have a board of trade to go up trade on. So when we deliver corn to an elevator, the elevator will turn around, hedge that purchase up on the board of trade. And then from there on, it doesn't really matter what the price does. Sunflowers don't have that luxury. And so when you're selling sunflowers to a sunflower processor, they don't have a board of trade they can come back on. They've got to sell that crop to a buyer. And so it's a more direct line. The good news about that is there is a contract called an act of God contract the processors offer. And it's pretty simple. If you don't produce the crop, you don't have to deliver it. So let's say you get hailed out or droughted out and you can't produce the contracted acres. You've got an act of God contract in place. What you do is call the processor, tell them, I've just got hailed out, I can't do it. They may send someone out to just confirm, but essentially you're out of the contract if something bad happens to the field where you can't deliver. So just keep in mind, there's a little premium for that, but it really takes the risk off of producing if you need a contract in place. All right, let's get a little bit more into the agronomics. And so, a long time ago, this was our weed control tool. This was our seed bed prep tool, and this was our erosion control tool. So we've got way better tools to work with. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about those tools and the strategies around them. So we now have equipment that will get through residue much better than previously. And so this is sunflowers planted in irrigated wheat stubble. And again, the equipment that we have today can be adjusted so you can get through some pretty thick stalks out there without much trouble. And the other piece to that is we now have herbicides that don't require so much incorporation. We have some that perform just fine without incorporation. They all do need a little bit of rain to activate them. But again, we've got way better tools than we used to. And of course, soil erosion in this scenario is almost non-existent. I'm not going to say a lot about herbicides. Jeannie's going to follow up with a herbicide discussion. And I'll mention a couple of products down the road here. But for the most part, weed questions, Jeannie will answer those for us. So what about rotation strategies? Well, we've got lots of irrigated corn in this part of the country, and with that comes corn rootworm issues. We've got some cornfields that the corn rootworm are eating through the GMO technology. And so crop diversification is one of the remedies for that. So corn and wheat are in the grass crop. Sunflowers are a broadleaf crop. Rotating those back and forth actually makes for a pretty good rotation because of the diseases and the bugs that jump on one crop will not transfer over and jump on the second one. So pretty good rotation there, and can reduce some insect and disease issues along the way as well. And this crop also fits in with water management issues. And so here in the Burlington area, we have a lot of 400 gallon a minute wells, and that's just not enough water in the middle of a drought to fully irrigate a crop. So one strategy is to split the pivot in half, put an early water use crop on one side, so sunflowers fit into that category, and a late water use crop on the other side, so that's our corn crop. And some years when we have a dry spring, we'll pre-water the sunflower side, and then when the growing season gets started, the water is focused on the corn side. And that's actually a rotation that has worked out pretty well. So sunflowers have that deep taproot. I'll talk a little bit about that in the future. But that deep taproot will go down deep and harvest deep soil moisture as well as fertilizer. And the sunflower crop is a pretty drought tolerant crop too. The other piece to this is it makes a 400 gallon a minute well perform similar to an 800 gallon a minute well, just because you've got the same water but half the acres. We'll touch a little bit on double crop sunflowers. And so sunflowers are pretty early crop. And, here in the Burlington area, we're about 4,000 feet above sea level. We've planted them as late as July 4th, and they've matured just fine with an early season hybrid. So a couple of strategies for cropping with sunflowers. And sometimes we come into the spring and we've got failed wheat fields due to winter injury or some other issue that can take place. And so you can plant sunflowers right into that failed wheat, provided you haven't put a carryover herbicide on that wheat. And Jeannie's going to talk a little bit about that in just down the road here. We also get those hailstorms coming through in early summer. And so following a hail, one suggestion is to fallow that hailed wheat crop and then plant your summer fallow and into sunflowers. And that way you've got fallow that you can plant wheat into in September. So that's an option for you. Another option, and it's especially important, I think, south of I-70 and east of Burlington, planting sunflowers following a wheat harvest. So we're planting in essentially early July, we're harvesting in October. This works best with irrigation and south of I-70. And so again, in the Burlington area and western Kansas, we typically only get about 18 inches of moisture. And so on a dryland field, it can work, but we're going to have some moisture after wheat harvest to make that work. As you get east, where moisture is better and growing seasons are longer, then double cropping really, I think, has a pretty good future. And I'll show you some yield data from an on-farm double cropped trial as well. And then you can also plant sunflowers following a spring feed crop. So we're planting some feed this time of the year, oats, barley, things like that. Those are going to be taken off in mid-June or so, depending on the season. And you can go right back into that with some sunflowers if there's adequate moisture to get them germinated. So just some double crop strategies there if you have an interest in that. So how do they yield? Well, and I've got a cue here also, volunteer wheat control. So you see the picture here, we've planted right into wheat stubble. If we get volunteer wheat growing in those sunflower plants, typically the wheat is thin enough and it doesn't interfere with sunflower production all that much. However, that volunteer wheat can harbor wheat streak mosaic virus, and we've got a lot of planted wheat out here. So in the fall of the year, those wheat curl mites can jump from volunteer wheat into growing wheat and cause you some trouble. So Jeanne probably will mention there are a lot of products, generic products now that you can control grasses in growing sunflower cheaply and effectively, and so that's usually not an issue for us. Okay, this comes again from a couple of growers, Cameron Pierce and Carl Esping. This is out of central Kansas, and you can see they've harvested this. So this is double crop sunflowers, and so they had decent rain. They had a season that they could get them matured in, and they produced well over 3,000 pounds per acre. We can't achieve those kinds of yields in western Kansas and eastern Colorado, but if you have those yields, so we're talking 1,500 pounds, we should be in the ballpark. And some of our earlier trials that we've tried double cropping, we've ranged 800 pounds to 1,200 pounds per acre of oil type sunflowers. So just something to keep in mind if you live in an area with longer growing seasons, better moisture, double cropping after wheat could be a pretty good option for you. All right, what about fertility? So at the top right hand of the slide, it takes about 50 pounds of nitrogen to produce 1,000 pounds of sunflowers. Now, some agronomists will disagree with that. They'll say it's closer to 60, and other guys will say it's probably closer to 40, but essentially 40 to 60 pounds to produce 1,000 pounds of sunflower is about the range. And from there, you set your yield goal, set your nitrogen needed, and then subtract whatever residual nitrogen you have in the soil. And another key component is organic matter. So some of the research out there is finding that for every 1% organic matter level your soil holds, then you can credit about 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Okay, and then plus whatever is left over from the previous crop. So this just shows, the chart shows a nitrogen fertility study by Merle Behill. He's at Akron, Colorado. They get about 15 inches of rain yearly there, but this particular year, they had really great rain mid-season, and you can see they produced well over 2,000 pounds of sunflower per acre on dry land. But essentially what he did was put on 0 pounds per acre of nitrogen, 30 pounds per acre, 60 pounds per acre, 90 pounds per acre. That yield trial topped out at 60 pounds per acre, and he produced over 2,500 pounds of sunflower per acre. Now, we just got done talking that it takes about 50 pounds of nitrogen to produce 1,000 pounds of sunflowers. You could say, hey, they didn't put on near enough nitrogen to produce 2,500 pounds per acre. That would be a correct assumption. The caveat is off on the right-hand side. The previous crop was well-fertilized wheat. So sunflower has a taproot system, and it can reach down well below the levels that other crops can get to, and it can harvest not only deep fertilizer, but deep water as well. So that's one of the advantages this crop has. Now, there's some new information that suggests that nitrogen applied about 200 pounds per acre may not help yield all that well. So we do have some professional irrigated growers that shoot for 4,000 pounds of sunflower per acre. And we're telling them, when you get to that 200 pounds of added nitrogen, you probably don't need to add any more. And then I've got another cue for me, the phosphorus response. If your soils are testing medium or better in phosphorus, you may not need to put very much phosphorus fertilizer down as well. So keep that in mind. Those could be some fertilizer money saving techniques that you can employ. All right, what about some of the other inputs? So I get questions about, should I put a micronutrient down, or a fungicide, or an insecticide, or nitrogen, and what should we put down? So this is a trial I did for a number of years at Prospect Valley. I put on N, P, and K. That topped the trial. And so one of my struggles with this is, okay, now I got to partition out and see whether it was the N, the P, or the K, or all three that added to yield. So I did it a couple of more years after that on the same farm. It was actually the nitrogen that bumped yield up, and not the phosphorus or the potassium, and not very much nitrogen, about 30 pounds per acre, applied at about V4, and that gave us a yield bump on this particular farm. Should I apply fungicides? My trials have not generated yield increases to fungicides, and I would tell you, take a look at the leaf tissue during the course of the season. If they're clean, fungicide won't help you at all. If you do see some fungal infections, rust is one of them, then a fungicide may be warranted. Kind of depends on what time of the year and how bad it is. So again, just applying a fungicide has not increased yields. I also put an insecticide on early thinking, okay, was there an insect bothering this particular farm? The answer is no. An insecticide did not increase yields. However, we always apply an insecticide at bloom time, and I'm going to talk about that. This particular trial was no different. What it tells us is an early insecticide was not needed, but the bloom time insecticide is standard operating procedures for us. And then the last one I want to talk about is the micronutrient addition. I've looked at micronutrients over about a 4-year period on 4 different farms, and I have yet to get a response to micronutrients. And again, this mix has 7 or 8 different micros in it. So if I get a bump, then I got to partition it out and do the study again with each of those ones individually. But thus far, I'm not getting a bump with micronutrients. Now, I do have people calling me and saying, we think they help on our farm. And I'm fine with that. I do tell them, put micros down, leave a check strip or not. You're not applying any, and let the combine tell you whether or not it's paying for itself. So micros haven't increased yields in my trials, but that doesn't mean that they don't work. Just try them on your farm if you have an interest. All right, let's switch over to insects. And, I tell people the plant is native to the high plains, and so are their pests. And so we have a number of insects that bother sunflower, and I'll talk a little bit about those. For the most part, there are 4 of them that we're concerned with. So this is a chart out of North Dakota State University, and I've crossed out midge and lygus bug. We see a few here once in a while, but I just never treated for them down here. But we do have 2 types of moths, so sunflower head moth, banded sunflower head moth, and then we have the seed weevils down here too. So I'm showing the red seed weevil. We also have a gray one. So I tell folks, there's 4 insects we're concerned with, but to make this simple, we treat them all at the same time and all with the same products. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in just a little bit. But when you see a few heads out there starting to bloom, it's time to get really critical about scouting for insect levels. And so this is less than 1% bloom. The best time to spray is 10% bloom. So that's 1 in 10 plants that are open. And keep in mind, on a warm week with good growing conditions, they can go from this kind of bloom to this kind of bloom. And so if you're spraying your sunflowers for the first time when they're in full bloom, then you're a little on the late side. The best time is when 1 plant in 10 is blooming, and that will give you the best control. Strategy is control the adults before they lay very many eggs. And so here you're going to get adult control, but those eggs are going to hatch, develop into larvae. The larvae will eat the seeds and cause you trouble. So that's really important to keep in mind. The other piece to that is, these are just mostly pollinators we're seeing. I get calls about, I've got all kinds of bugs on my sunflowers, should I spray them? And the answer is no. The ones you see are not the problem bugs. So there's 3 or 4 kinds of honeybees here. And there's one called a soldier beetle. That's the orange and black one. They're just pollinators to feed on the pollen. They're not doing any damage. It's the insects you don't see that are the troublemakers. And so this is a gray seed weevil. You can find them. They're in the bracts. They don't show themselves unless you find them. So gray seed weevil. This is a red seed weevil, a little bit smaller insect, but rust colored. And again, they're in those leaves. You just have to do a little scouting for them. One easy way to scout for seed weevils, just take your thumb and brush it against the front of the head. They'll back out. And in this particular slide, there are 3 of them. I'll show them to you. There's 1, there's 2, there's the 3rd one. So the economic threshold for oil type sunflower seeds, it's based on the cost of production and price of the product, is 5 or 6 seed weevils per head. The economic threshold for confection sunflowers is 1 head. So we're there on this particular sunflower. So remember the 2 head moths we talked about? This is a sunflower head moth, and then there's a soldier beetle right beside it. The soldier beetle is just a pollen feeder, but the sunflower head moth, again, is going to be feeding on pollen and then laying eggs in that head, and the larvae are the troublemakers out there for us. This is a banded sunflower head moth. Now, they aren't so tame that you can catch them and put them on your finger and they'll stay. I actually harvested this out of a pheromone trap and put him on my finger just to take a picture, but much smaller insect. And again, those are the two head moths that bother sunflower. In here we have a head moth, sunflower head moth, and a red seed weevil, and you'll see the discoloration on the head. That moth has laid an egg, the larva has burrowed into the head, and we have a disease called head rot as a result of that. So it takes an entry wound, which the larva has provided, and then the right environment. And as a result of that, head rot can be pretty serious some years. This is a pheromone trap where the pheromone is located on top of that milk jug. We've got a 50-50 antifreeze water down below. The bugs, the head moths, will fly into that trap, get caught in the antifreeze water mix, and we can count them from there. So it's a pretty easy way to scout. The pheromone trap is available online. We made the trap ourselves. The pheromones you can purchase, and again, are not expensive and not hard to get. I'm going to see if this video will work. And as we walk through this thing, you'll see white moths flying up ahead of us, and those are sunflower head moths. And so this is just one way we can use to scout for them. As we walk through this, you'll see those white dots flying away from us. And so those are sunflower head moths. Let's see if this will work for us. There are the dots. You can see the white moths flying around. And again, the question is, should we control in this field? And the answer is no. There's not really enough yield to protect here. The other piece, this is late in the year. These are only about a week or so from physiological maturity. And so we're late enough in the season, and not enough yield to protect, I wouldn't spray. But this is a pretty heavy infestation. So if you're walking through sunflower fields and you're seeing that kind of level, definitely is a treatable level. Okay, the good news is protection is available. So there are registered insecticides and a number of them. And there's some newer ones too. This is Prevathon. So its chemical name is Rynoxapyr. You can see the green dots on the right-hand side. That means EPA has tested them to have very little impact on some of the good bugs. So predators and some of the insects that we don't want to control, such as lacewings, ladybird, beetles, predatory bugs, and predatory mites. So the other piece to that is Prevathon has a restricted entry interval of only 4 hours. So 4 hours after you apply this, you can be back out in that field if you need to be. Something like Lorsban is probably a couple of days before we can walk out in that. So just keep in mind, it's a real safe product for people and the environment. And so this just shows you, this is data out of North Dakota State University. Everything we're using so far is working pretty well. We're not seeing solid resistance to any of the insecticides. And so it's important to rotate your insecticide from year to year. And I'm going to go ahead and plug my computer in just to make sure we don't get disconnected. All right, I'm back on. So keep in mind, it's a good idea to rotate the insecticides, and but so far everything's working. We are getting some reports of maybe some of the pyrethroids are a little less effective than we'd like to see. We'll keep an eye on that. If that becomes a problem, we'll let everybody know. All right, and in addition to that, there are tank mixes out there. So I've got one here. It's called Besiege, and it's a Syngenta product. And I mention that because there are times when the commercial tank mixes are less expensive than buying the products separately and dump them and mixing them yourself. So this is Besiege's Prevathon Plus Warrior. Now, Prevathon is very good on the moths, but not so good. It's a little weaker on the seed weevils. So if you've got both moths and seed weevils out there, something like Besiege would be a better choice. Okay, this is just some data looking at Prevathon, and it's strong on head moth larva, weak on seed weevil larva. The Prevathon, I had about 4 damaged seeds per 100. The check that year, I had about 31 damaged seeds per 100. So again, if head moth is the issue, Prevathon is a pretty good remedy. Just a little bit about data planting. This just shows us that the later the planting date, the less problems we have with stem boring insects. And so Dectes is one of those stem borers that can be affected by planting dates. So the earlier planted sunflowers, we had a little bit more trouble with the stem borer than the later planted. And with that, we can make the statement, double crop sunflowers have fewer insect issues than regular sunflowers planted earlier in the season. The same can be said for planting date effects on stem weevil. So again, the later the planting date, the fewer issues we had with the stem boring insects. What about moisture at harvest time? So this is shows you 10% moisture on some sunflowers that we were harvesting. A couple of days later, we came back to the same field and kept going, and they were 8% or less. And you can see that we got a lot more pulverized heads. There was more trash in the bin. We had seed shattering losses. There were harvest losses out there. And with combining 8% or less sunflowers, fires can be a hazard. And so if that's the case, you need to slow the cylinder down, open up the concave clearance, and increase the air, because you want to blow that chaff out the back. And this just gives you an example. The dockage on the left is 60%. The dockage on the right is 6%. The 60% confection sunflowers will probably be rejected. They're going to tell you to adjust that combine and get the trash out of there for the next loads that you bring in. A little bit about stands. If you take a look, this is out of Akron and some years ago, but the population was about 5,837 plants per acre. That's a half a stand. And we debated whether to even leave it go, and we ended up leaving it. The skips were uniform, so we didn't have 5-foot skips in this. They were more like 3- and 4-foot skips, but they were uniform throughout. And you can see it rained a little bit there that year too, because they had just under 2,000-pound sunflowers. Again, what that tells us is the sunflower plant can adjust its head size based on growing conditions and population. So I'm about ready to finish up here. If you're not getting the Sunflower magazine, you can sign up for it. It's without cost. You get up to the website, sunflowernsa.com. Published 6 times a year, and they actually send an editor down to the High Plains, and so there are stories about High Plains production strategies in it, and so keep that in mind. It's a very good informational source. And I'll just mention this briefly. So can we get to 5,000 pounds per acre? This is a trial some years ago that we had up at Prospect Valley, and one of the varieties there yielded 4,998.8 pounds per acre. It's now released as Red River 2414, and so that's the work that those plant breeders are doing for us. We haven't hit that since. It's been some time, but one of those good sunflower years, we're going to get there again. Okay, so just to summarize, control the broadleaves in the previous grass crop, control the grasses in the sunflower crop. There is some resistant kochia out there. Jeanne's going to talk a little bit about that. Fertility, soil tests, set yield goals accordingly. For 3,000 pound yield, nitrogen needs to be at about 150 pounds per acre or so. Phosphorus, I've got 0 pounds per acre on medium testing soils. Potassium may be needed only on sandier soils. Micros, I just haven't had a response to micronutrient applications yet. And then be sure to soil test, know what you've got there. Stand establishment, make sure you plant about 2 inches deep. Use the smallest sized seed you can get. We've always had better emergence with smaller sized seed. So what that means is order your seed early and get the smallest kind you can get. Control insects at 10% bloom. That's 1 plant in 10 that are blooming. Irrigation produces best with about 21 inches of total water. That's just a little bit more than wheat, a lot less than corn. And the peak water use is the same as in any crop. It's during bloom, which would be the same as corn and tassel or wheat at heading. And then harvest as close to 10% moisture as possible. All right, I'm going to finish up here, Jeanne. And if there are some questions that got asked, in the chat box, let me know. I am going to address some questions that I printed off on this end. What is the sodium tolerance to sunflower? So sodium is salt, and sunflowers are very tolerant to salt. So barley's the best. Sunflowers actually come back in at about second or third, but they're pretty tolerant to that. Should we use growth regulators in sunflowers? The answer is no. If you want taller sunflowers, there are tall varieties. If you want shorter sunflowers, there are short statured varieties. And so growth regulators haven't been beneficial in that crop yet. Fungicide application for plant health. I have not gotten a response to fungicide applications. And so that's important. Unless there's a disease showing itself, I wouldn't apply a fungicide. Management tips for raising the oil content in sunflowers. So pick a variety that is a high oil variety. You can get into the testing, land-grant university testing. With oils, we not only reporting yields, but oil percentage as well. And then sunflowers planted a little bit on the earlier side tend to raise a little bit more oil than sunflowers planted later. And then the other piece to that is drought at the end of the season tends to lower oil. And so I think that's why the earlier planted flowers produce more oil. Oil is one of the last things laid into the plant, and so they'll grow along real good. If they get stressed at the end of the season, oil tends to drop. And that might be all the questions I have printed. Anything else?
Ron, I don't have any questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, so we will go ahead and switch gears here to weed control. If you guys do have some more questions for Ron, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or the chat box on YouTube. And Ron will be with us here for a while, and so we'll get those answered. We're running a little short on time, so we're going to move through weed control fairly quickly. And so I always laugh, is this your idea of weed control? And that's to blow up the where all the weeds are. And hopefully we're not going to get to that point dealing with weed control in sunflowers, because we can manage the weeds. We just have to have a plan of attack. So, okay, so we're going to focus on Palmer amaranth because I think that's the weed that is the most challenging in sunflower production, mostly because it comes up all year long. It has a very robust growth pattern, you know, putting on a million seeds or more on some of these. And there is this genetic diversity. And so you see these two heads here in this picture, and one is a male and one is a female. So pick out what you guys think in your minds, which is which, and we'll let you know here. So the male plant is the one on the left. If you grab a hold of that seed head, it is quite a bit softer. If you grab a hold of the female seed head, they're very prickly, and some maybe say that's fitting for female plants and females in general, but I kind of laugh at that. But there is some differences in how those seed heads will look. This also means that there is the ring combination of genes every time we are producing seed. And so that really adds to the challenge of this weed because of the genetic differences in it. You can see it over here in all of these plants here, very different looking plants. And so that is also the stem of where a lot of herbicide resistance stems from. And I'm not going to cover all the different types of herbicide resistance in Palmer amaranth, just that we have we have some populations in Kansas that have multiple types of resistance for the Palmer amaranth. So, okay, preventative weed management, and that is the key with sunflowers. Don't let the weeds emerge and have a plan of attack. If you do not have one of these herbicide guides, send me an email and I'll drop one in the mail to you. We also have them available online, so you can just Google 2021 Chemical Weed Control Guide, K-State, and this will pop up. Also, as part of your plan of attack, use this herbicide guide for that base information on what can be applied to sunflowers. We also need to think about an early spring treatment. So something that is going on now or has already been put on fields to prevent the emergence of kochia, like Ron mentioned. We need that burn down pre-application, anything else that has came up, and get a good, strong pre-program down. And then because we have post applications listed on there, we have a fairly limited options for post applications. Okay, so I thought it was important we talk about everything that could prevent us from having double crop wheat or double crop sunflowers after wheat. So many of our wheat herbicides have long residual. We like them in our wheat crop because they have long residual. The challenge is they may prevent us from having double crop sunflowers out. So keep this in mind. We have some that are as short as like a 3-month rotation, but we have several others that are pretty common to use, like an Ally 2,4-D mix or an Amber or a Finesse mix that is 18 months up to quite a bit longer than that. So keep in mind what you're putting on your wheat may lock you out of having double crop flowers. So keep the herbicide applications that you've had on in mind. There's also a few in corn that could prevent you to go back to sunflowers. Accent is one. There's a few others, but just pull up the herbicide labels on which you've applied before and just look for recropping concerns on those. And you will see this list. This is the list that I went through and just pulled up herbicide labels and looked to see what our rotation restrictions are. Okay, Ron mentioned this residue. Residue is an excellent weed preventative measure. And so you'll see some volunteer wheat coming up, like Ron mentioned. Fairly easy to get that under control with a grass herbicide, but many of our weeds need a flash of light and warm temperatures. And so dark, one of our other weed scientists will say dark is a great herbicide, and that is true. Anytime that we can prevent that flash of light from happening, that will help prevent weed emergence. Okay, here is another look at that is canopy. Whenever you walk out into sunflowers with a really good canopy on them, that also helps prevent weed emergence. It always seems like when I see these big Palmer amaranth plants as I'm walking through my plots or something else, it's where I have a skip and don't have a sunflower plant there for a 3 or a 5 foot area. So that's a concern. So if you have a good canopy, that's also going to help prevent weed emergence. Okay, sunflower competition. Sunflowers are not very competitive until they get some size to them. So not very competitive from emergence to V2. So this one here is a V2 plant. We have 2 leaves that are here and they are over 1.5 inches long. So that's how you know when to count a leaf is when they're 1.5 inches long. Okay. Weeds emerging after this V4, probably more like a V6, do not have as much impact on yield. Can they still impact it? Yes, but not as much as weeds that are coming up at the same time as the sunflowers. And anytime we are dry, that really magnifies these conditions. And so weeds will be more detrimental the longer that they are out there. So the ones that come up sooner are the ones that pull a lot more, are a lot more competitive with our sunflowers. Okay, early spring, March, April timeline. We need to control any winter annuals, mare's tail, and kochia. Okay, so kochia is emerging out in the field right now. I walked out and looked at a field this morning that had kochia just peeking through. Okay, so we also need to think about the winter annuals and mare's tail if you are in eastern Kansas or southeast Kansas. So glyphosate or paraquat can go in and get a handle on some of these. I always get the question is if we can apply like 2,4-D, Phylloxipir, something along those lines. And the answer really is no. There's nothing on the label that allows for those to be planted ahead of sunflowers. Valor is something that you can put on ahead of sunflowers. So 30 days for every 2 ounces that you're putting on per acre. They do a good job on getting horseweeds, and Valor's decent on kochia. Valor may have a little bit of burn to it on if you have kochia that has emerged, but you really want the Valor on prior to the kochia coming up. Elevore is another herbicide more recently released. applied at least 14 days prior to planting, and it does have some control on mare's tail, some on henbit, especially if you're a little further east and have more of those winter annuals that are a problem. Okay. Pre-emergence applications, these are the most important part of a herbicide program. So we have a few that Ron mentioned earlier that are looking at, or are more ones that need to be incorporated. Sonalan and Trufflan are those two herbicides. We don't use those as much because they do require that incorporation. Really, our heavy lifters of our sunflower programs include Spartan, Prowl H2O, Dual Magnum, and Zidua. Zidua is a more recent label that we have. Okay, so Spartan is important if you have a Palmer amaranth out there in the field. It also will help with some kochia and other broadleaves, some of the smaller seeded broadleaves. Okay, S-metolachlor, Dual Magnum, or any of the generics that are on the market. Grasses is what Dual help pick up, and some small seeded broadleaves. Now, Prowl H2O will help with grasses, and it's actually more effective on grasses than on the broadleaf side of things. And then we have the Zidua. I also have the number, if you're looking at some older research, you may see this KIH 485 and that's the Kumei experimental number. And so, but that's named Zidua. It controls grasses and small seeded broadleaves, and will have some activity on Palmer amaranth and other pickweed species. Okay, so the thing on all of these is they provide no control of emerged weeds. So if you're putting these on as a pre and you already have some weeds out there, go ahead and throw glyphosate in to get what is already emerged out there in the field, and then these will be put down to help prevent more emergence. Now, you also need moisture for activation. And so we're always going to be hoping for a rain right after we get our herbicide put on. If we could order it, that's what we would like, but we do need some moisture for activation. Okay, post herbicide. So we have some options for herbicide tolerant sunflowers. We have Clearfield, which is the Beyond herbicide, and then we have Express Sun, which is Express herbicide. The thing with these is, while we do have them and we have herbicide tolerant sunflowers to put in the ground so that we have these options, we need to manage expectations. We need to be going after broadleaves that are less than 3 inches tall, and grasses before they exceed the 4 to 5 leaf stage with Beyond. So this is important because we cannot let weeds get much size to them and expect Beyond or Express for that matter to go in and do a great job of getting control on those. So keep that in mind. These are the ones that we can have in place, but do not rely on these solely for keeping Palmer amaranth or other weeds under control. They may also not control ALS resistant pigweeds, which we have, and kochia, which we also have. The important part on these for Beyond and Express, they are not cross resistant. If you spray Beyond sunflowers with Express, you will control the sunflowers, and vice versa. If you have Express sunflowers and you spray Beyond, you will also control your sunflowers, meaning that those sunflowers will turn yellow, will turn necrotic, and most likely go ahead and kick the bucket in some cases on those. So keep that in mind. Know what you've got in the field. Also on post herbicides, we do have some grass control options like Ron mentioned. We have Select, Assure 2, Post Plus, a lot of these very common herbicides for going in and getting grass out of the, very important for volunteer wheat so that we do not have a source for wheat streak mosaic virus. Let's see, pre-harvest intervals, 60 to 70 days on that. Okay, Zidua. So we're going to spend just a couple of minutes talking through Zidua. There's some more of an extensive label on Zidua. You can put it on early pre-plant, pre-emergence, or early post. It does some pretty good broad spectrum weed control. You can use it to target some of these later emerging weeds to extend the amount of time where you have preventative emergence control out there, because Zidua has no post-emergence activity. So if weeds are up, Zidua will not help us much. Okay, one of the ways we can use Zidua is in as an overlapping residual, meaning that as time goes along and our pre's, say we have Spartan and Dual out there in the field, as those start to wear off, this is the time where we can go in and put an application of Zidua on at this point and extend the residual amount, the amount of time that we have of residual herbicide out there. So this Zidua can be applied from V1 to V8. Okay, so we're going to quickly run through some research here on sequential applications of Zidua. So this is some research funded by National Sunflower Association. I had a location in Colby. We had several others scattered out across Northwest Kansas and Western Nebraska. Okay, so here's some of the results from my study in Colby in 2018. So we had Prowl applied by itself, and then we had Prowl plus Zidua, and this is early post. So this is 2 weeks after the Prowl, 2 weeks after emergence. And then we have Prowl plus Zidua later, mid post, that's 4 weeks. And then this is at 6 weeks. We have also this with Broadax treatments and with Spartan Charge. If you're not familiar, Spartan Charge is Spartan plus AIM or carfentrazone. And so that's the products that we had. So our main treatments was the Prowl, the Broadax, and then Spartan Charge, followed by different timings of Zidua applications. Now, let's just look at Broadax here. So we have really good control as we're showing here. So the Broadax was doing its job. It was getting really good control as a pre-emergence herbicide. And so as you can see, our numbers tend to go down over time, and that could be because we are seeing some more emergence, or most likely it's because the weeds that are out there are just keep getting bigger. And so the weed control percentage will go down. The thing to notice on this is if we are looking at Prowl by itself or Spartan Charge, Broadax really had better treatments, and in all reality, the Zidua applications was picking up some preventative of weed control, but in all reality, our pre-emergence treatments did a really good job, and maybe we didn't need as much Zidua following up with that. That is also showed here, the non-treated check. This is weed density, so the number of Palmer amaranth per row. And so we see this bar here for untreated. This plot was just thick with Palmer amaranth. These are the error bars here. When these error bars do not overlap each other, that means there's not a statistical difference, or there is a statistical difference. And so all of these treatments down here were not statistically different, other than the non-treated weed control. So there was no difference in weed density. So what this is really saying is that our pre-emergence treatments, the Prowl by itself, Broadax, and Spartan did a really good job just holding Palmer amaranth back in general. In Hayes, we see similar stuff. So Hayes would be a dryland location. We also decreased our plant population because we needed to create a more open canopy. I mentioned that when we have gaps or poor emergence, then that's where we see our weeds coming through. We tried to decrease our population to help with that. So we would get more weeds to come up because, of course, in weed science, we want weeds to be able to control out there. So you'll see a little bit, Broadax did also a nice job with controlling these. We still have that fall off kind of here at the end. This actually has ratings for Palmer and for kochia, so you'll see a little bit of difference in these treatments here. But in all reality, Broadax by itself did a really nice job keeping it season-long control. After 2019, we further decreased our plant population so that we would have some Palmer amaranth and kochia out there to really feel like we're getting a better understanding of how that Zidua is helping us. Here's the Broadax at the 25-ounce rate. You can see there is nothing down these rows for weeds that are emerging on this. Okay, where would that sequential treatment of Zidua really work well? Okay, if you have a poor stand. So if we're looking at a field out here like this where we have these big gaps, and part of the big gap on this is I'm pretty sure we had rabbits that just went down the row and ate seedlings as they emerged. So they did a pretty good job getting a handle on our sunflowers here, but this is the type of reason we would want a sequential Zidua treatment out there. If you have a canopy or a hail that opens up that canopy, that would be a really good situation for Zidua to give that bump in residual activity. If you're planting sunflowers where you know you have a history of Palmer amaranth problems, that would be a good reason to be planning for that later Zidua treatment. If you're in a field with unknown history, just because you don't know what kind of weed pressure, you might just plan for that Zidua treatment. Also, let's see, there was one more thing I thought. Oh, if your pre's do not get activated very well and you get a rainfall and you're afraid that we're going to have a flush of Palmer or kochia that is coming up after we have a rain, that might be a great time to get another Zidua treatment down if you didn't have enough moisture to get your pre's activated and get those in place to prevent any other weed emergence. Okay, summary of weed control. Get a plan in place. Get a plan yesterday and get things going on it, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in this, because our pound of cure does not look very exciting in post-emergence control of weeds and sunflowers. Start clean and stay clean. Prevent the emergence. Pre-herbicides are critical. We mentioned in here that Broadax has done a really nice job. Broadax, I think I failed to mention that as a tank mix of Dual and Spartan. Spartan Charge also did a really nice job with weed control. Mention that Proulone in our most recent studies when we were doing that overlapping residual treatment, the Proulone didn't do as good of a job. So if you're putting Proul out, tank mix it with Spartan also. Protect that yield in the early season, prevent emergence of any weeds from that emergence up to that V4, V6 stage, because our post options are just limited. In-crop applications of Zidua can help with preventing additional emergence when that canopy gets opened up, or if that never gets to canopy. So that's the reasons Zidua would be a good fit for you. Okay, there is my contact information. If you have questions on weed control, please reach out to me. I'm happy to try to get them answered for you. There is my website with some information on it. I post all the time on our Facebook and Twitter accounts, and you can just email me directly on that. So with that, that is everything I have for weed control. And I knew we moved through it pretty quick, but we're already over on time. If we have any questions, go ahead and put them in our box here, the Q&A box. Let's see. I don't see any questions coming in right now. I would just say that we would really, as we're wrapping up this webinar, I'm going to put the links to the evaluation in there. We would really appreciate any feedback from you guys on this webinar. I know it seems like we moved through a lot of subjects very quickly. You got kind of a quick look at many things all at the same time. And so because of that, please, of course, I can't quite get things to where I think they should be. Give me just a second and I'll put that link to the evaluation here in the chat box. But if you guys do have any questions, please let me know or open it up for Ron. We also have Mike Williams on with us from Red River Commodities. Let me look here. I can tell you who else we have with us. We have Carl Esping, who is also on High Plains Sunflower Committee. So if you have any questions for those guys, go ahead and put them in the box too, especially on markets or things along those lines. We can sure spend a little bit of time answering those as well. Ron, do you have anything that we should add to this?
I don't.
Okay.
Well done.
We still have folks on here, so if folks have questions, please send them to us. Let me check my email to make sure I haven't missed any questions in there. The other thing is if you guys are attending for CCA credits, go ahead and send me an email to let me know that you have been attending and that you are signing off for the day. We're very open to having webinars like this. So if you guys have specific topics, or if there's something that we zoomed right through today, please let us know. We can put together another webinar where we focus in more on specific type of questions as you guys have them, or as we're going through the growing season and you are seeing things in the field that you don't know what's going on. We can always put together kind of an impromptu webinar like this to just answer folks' questions as we go. So with that, Mike, did you have anything you would like to add at the end here?
No, very good program. Enjoyed and good information.
Great, thanks, Mike. Mike is also chair of the High Plains Sunflower Committee. So with that, I guess, since we have no questions, which I don't know if that means we did a great job or an awful job, Ron, that we covered all the bases here. But if we don't have any questions, I think we'll go ahead and sign off for the day. Please go and fill out that survey. It's not very long, and part of it is some demographic data so that Ron and I can report that back on our when we have to report back on our jobs. But just give us some feedback on if this answered your questions today, or if there have other things you have questions on, go ahead and put those in the box too. So you're very welcome, Josh. Thanks for attending. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off then.
Thanks to those that spoke, and thanks to those that attended.
Thanks, Mike.
Jeannie, I'm going to sign off.